Sci-fi is a big genre. Alien invasion movies are a subgenre of that, and the pod people is where we find today's microgenre. It all starts with a book back in the 1950s called Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. The 50s were rife with science fiction movies tackling the existential crisis of the decade, the Cold War, atomic bombs, and nuclear energy. So if we expanded to just alien invasion movies, the list would be far too big. But pod people, that's something we could do in one video. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of those titles so ubiquitous in pop culture that we all know it without actually having seen it. I myself hadn't even seen it and watched any of them until recently, and it scratched a very specific itch for me. You know when you watch a movie and all of a sudden you get a bunch of references from other movies that you only ever understood from context before, but now you're in on the joke? Let me give you an example. My first introduction to Invasion of the Body Snatchers came in 1992. It was a Darkwing Duck episode entitled Twin Beaks. Dr. Bushroot is replacing the citizens of St. Canard with duplicates that are grown out of these pods.
Mr. Ballard, you gotta help me!
What?
It's my family! They've been acting really weird.
Rescue Rangers had a similar episode, as did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the animated Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. The references are everywhere. And that was in the early 90s when I was 12. I didn't see the original movie for another 30 years, and when I was 12 in 1992, the original movie was already 36 years old, so I enjoyed those stories as a kid without having seen the movie, but now I get it. I get the reference. And when I saw The World's End in 2013, I still hadn't seen Body Snatchers yet, but I got that what it was doing sort of like a Body Snatchers kind of thing, and now the pieces are starting to fall into place and I know exactly what it borrows and what's new, and I love that about watching movies and also just learning in general, putting another piece of the puzzle into place. So should we go over the plot at all? I mean, I feel like I just sort of did. We kind of covered it. There's aliens that are invading our planet. They're replacing us with duplicates grown in pods. The duplicates are identical to us in every way, but subdued, emotionally sedate. The original novel by Jack Finney wasn't quite as sinister as the movies became. The space pods did duplicate people and try to take over, but unconvincingly they gave up at the end when they see that the steely resolve of humanity won't let them get away with it. Honestly, it sounds a little bit anticlimactic in the book, but the visual elements of the pods and the creepy and emotionless clones are there, and the paranoia, the suspicion, the mind-numbing terror. The themes here are clearly exploring the individual versus the collective, conformity and groupthink, and in the tradition of many of the greatest science fiction stories, the meaning is subjective or ambiguous for the viewer. I think most people think that the meaning is obvious, and I would agree, but let me show you what I mean. Our first adaptation in 1956 was directed by Don Siegel, who directed many classic movies including Dirty Harry and Escape from Alcatraz. It's black and white and stars Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter. It was made at a time that McCarthyism and fear of communism was taking America by storm, so, you know, nothing like today. A paranoia gripping people about a political movement invading their country from within, the possibility that your neighbors could be one of them, invisible to the naked eye, and yet the analysis of the film revealed that people saw it as an allegory both as the dangers of communism and as a commentary on the dangerous conformity to the crazed groupthink of people like McCarthy, who of course was drumming up fake outrage over false accusations that American government officials were communist actors or agents or whatever. And at this point, I think we can take away from what McCarthyism really means with this quote. The term is used more generally to describe reckless and unsubstantiated accusations of treason and far-left extremism, along with demagogic personal attacks on the character and patriotism of political adversaries. Does that sound familiar at all? See, this is what I think makes the story so effective at permeating the zeitgeist, the public consciousness, and why it resonates so much with us and pops up every couple decades. When people can project their own fears, rational or not, into the art and get some meaning out of it for themselves, we make personal connections with it. Now, it wasn't the only paranoid alien invasion movie out of the 50s, of course. Howard Hawks' Thing from Another World, remade as John Carpenter's The Thing, came out in 1951. The Robert Heinlein book The Puppet Masters was published in 1951 with a very similar idea to Jack Finney's novel 4 years earlier. And that was bootlegged into a movie called The Brain Eaters in 1958, and then got a proper remake in 1994. These are also movies where humans are being replaced by alien duplicates and similarly plays on our anxieties and paranoia. Invaders from Mars also came out in 1953. I Married a Monster and Quatermass were coming out, but the key difference between these and our microgenre is what? Pod people. Pods. This is funny, actually, right? Like, I wonder what people in the 1950s would think if they saw us today, all sitting around in public like zombies, glued to our phones like pod people. Even wearing AirPods. Pods. One last interesting point on our first movie was a last-minute addition of scenes that would bookend the film. They added dimension to the narrative that the adventure was being told in the past tense, as if it already happened, like the entire story was a flashback.
It started. For me, it started last Thursday. In response to an urgent message from my nurse, I'd hurried home from a medical convention I'd been attending.
And the difference that makes to the film is in giving the audience an out. That they would believe that this horrible thing might have happened, but because the narrative prologue explaining it in past tense, the audience would know that humanity won. And they wouldn't leave the movie ending with our hero going crazy, running down the streets like a lunatic, one of the more iconic shots of the film.
Listen to me! We're in danger! Get out of the street! Danger! Go on! Get out of here! You're in danger! Please! Get out of here! Go on! Get out of here! Get out! Please, listen to me! Something terrible! Please! You're next! Here they are! They're already here! Come! You're next!
In 1978, the movie was remade, as you just saw. Kevin McCarthy returns to pay tribute to the last scene of the first movie. But in a rare occurrence in film in general, this is one of the few remakes largely acknowledged as an improvement over the original. Considering how iconic the first was, this is an impressive feat. The film is now in color and boasts a cast that includes Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Leonard Nimoy, Jeff Goldblum, and Veronica Cartwright. And the pods are so well done. Old school practical effects that at the time were fresh and inventive. And considering that by now it's pretty dated aesthetically with haircuts and cars and whatnot, I was pretty impressed by the special effects in the movie, and I think that they hold up pretty well.
Jack!
Now, working backwards, I found a familiar scene that I had known from The Faculty in 1998 that turns out was an homage to this other scene for our naked lady in the shadows.
Gay, straight, alien.
Answer me something, Mary Beth.
There's nothing to be afraid of.
Are you naked?
They were right. It's painless.
Does it bother you, Zeke?
The Faculty is another alien invasion movie that pays tribute to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and we'll discuss it briefly before the end of this video, but we have a few more legit remakes to cover before then. I think the fondness that people feel for the 78 version is in equal measure to the quality of the final product, but also in recapturing the zeitgeist of such a powerful cinematic story. One last homage is the ending shot in the 78 version, which is new to Body Snatchers, where Donald Sutherland points with his mouth open and that final alien scream.
Sounds like a romantic evening. I won't keep you.
Achoo!
The legacy of Invasion was now secured with the 78 version, strengthened even, but it had also admittedly just been an update of the original story. In 1993 we got a new entry, simply titled Body Snatchers, and this functioned both as a sequel and a standalone film. This time the movie is set on a military base, which is helpful when writing a Body Snatchers with the theme of conformity. There are some familiar faces like Forrest Whitaker and Arlie Ermy, Meg Tilly and Gabrielle Anwar, but while this entry is decent and an entertaining movie, it doesn't quite resonate as much as the first two. It was a box office bomb financially, but the studio also only gave it a limited release in very few theaters, so the financial receipts don't reflect the actual reception.
Mommy? Mommy? Mommy?
Some critics gave it good reviews, while others clung to the classic and decried this as nothing but a retreading of familiar tropes. I think it works. It's decent, it just doesn't come out at the right time. Our next film is another really good example of this. The latest official adaptation of the classic story was in 2007, called The Invasion, and starring Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig's really terrible haircut. And we're just not doing pods anymore, people. The quintessential pod movie is remade with no pods. We're all next-level, sentient, mind-controlling virus by people who puke snot spray in people's faces. But without pods, it's just another generic alien thriller movie. Movies are made up of moments, and you need 2 or 3 really great moments or iconic images. The shower scene in Psycho, the Heston at the feet of the Statue of Liberty in Planet of the Apes, the needle going into Uma Thurman's chest in Pulp Fiction. And that's not to say they don't still nail the general vibe and story and the point of the film, and even recreate some truly iconic moments, like this scene where Nicole Kidman is running down the street screaming at passing cars. The reason for the movie lacking pods and the more distinct title is due to the screenwriter, who decided upon updating the story that he might streamline it in the name of modernity while seemingly stripping it of much of its character. David Kajanich said of his work, "You just have to look around at our world today to see that power inspires nothing more than the desire to retain it and to eliminate anything that threatens it," which is nice, except that it doesn't really come across in the movie at all. Instead, the subtext of the film is about how aliens were brokering universal health care and plans of world peace in their organized and homogenized cooperating groupthink, rather than our human chaos and infighting that prevents us from making the kind of progress we should be striving for. Nothing about holding on to power, really. It could be suggested that the idea is to pit individual freedom against the greater good, and if so, this theme is explored to much better effect and fun in The World's End, which we will touch on later. Now, if the themes don't really match the intention of the screenwriter, this could be because the producers weren't very happy with his script. Other writers were brought in and reshoots were done, and the title was changed from Invasion to The Visiting, and then back to The Invasion. It was a bit of a mess. Veronica Cartwright, who we last saw in the 1978 version, has a small role in a similar tradition to what McCarthy did in that version, returning for his cameo running down the street. And since Kidman takes that part in this version, Cartwright instead plays a patient of Nicole Kidman, who plays a psychiatrist who starts to notice more and more people coming in with the same types of problems, similar to Cartwright, who believes her husband isn't even her husband anymore.
My husband is not my husband.
What makes you say that?
And did they add dogs to the lore? There's like a little bit of business where dogs are alerted to the aliens and they get vicious and attack them just like instinctually, which is a nice addition, but like hardly an original concept, because we'd already seen that in Terminator. Like it felt like a very Terminator moment to me. So why did this one slip under the radar, as it were? It's not a bad movie, but as we will get to in a few minutes, this version of The Snatchers was preceded by 2 different but similar productions in 2005, also called Invasion, and they cut out the phrase Body Snatchers, which is the most defining part of the title, without which you could have simply just have any generic alien invasion movie or a Fox News discussion about immigration. They got rid of the pods, so what's left is a very generic and mostly expected paranoid alien invasion flick. There might also be the added element of using the success of Spielberg's War of the Worlds in 2005 to foist this remake onto the public, hoping to jump on a trend of remade 1950s sci-fi classics. In that respect, perhaps the filmmakers were chasing a perceived trend instead of hitting at a poignant time in the public conscience. But for all its production woes, the final product isn't going to be seen as the classic or definitive or best or favorite version of the story by most people. Now, remember a few minutes ago when we were talking about the 93 version and I said that the product was fine, but it didn't hit at the right time, and I said the next movie's a good example, and I'm making this movie in 2023, and the last couple of years the world went through a little pan-global event with the sneezing and the polarization through social media and the vitriol accusing the other side of being sheep and zombies and basically pod people. A post-2022 Body Snatchers movie starring Nicole Kidman now would hit so different. Now, for every production, there is a lesser quality copycat version. We know this, and this has to be the mantra of Asylum films. So if there's a Nicole Kidman version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, then grab onto the pop culture vernacular and call yours pod people and just move forward. You know how they do. In 2007, we got Invasion of the Pod People. Of course, I'd like to think that the transmorphers could at least transmorph. Invasion of the Pod People has no pod people. I mean, I guess they have the people, just not the pods. And another part of what makes this production so ineffectual has got to be that the only remnant of the actual pods that they so brazenly put in the title is these little stumpy potted plants that are neither terrifying nor are they pods. The twists are all expected, and the characters underreact to most situations. I feel like in every episode or chapter or video I make that I mention an Asylum film, I find myself saying, "It's an Asylum film," but to those who know what that means, it means everything. It's not unwatchable if you like terrible B-movies of a certain particular low level, but you should be prepared for that. This illegitimate knockoff of Body Snatchers is the perfect springboard to do some honorable mentions, okay? So we covered all the specific adaptations claiming to be the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but there are also some really great movies that are clear, intentional homages, and let's look at some of those right now. In 2005, we got one season of a TV series called Invasion, though there are no pods in this one. Instead, it's a sort of golden alien fish that extracts the DNA from its prey and creates a duplicate. If the 2007 Nicole Kidman Invasion movie was riding the aesthetic coattails of Spielberg's War of the Worlds, then 2005 Invasion the TV series was riding the aesthetic coattails of Lost. What I think sets this series apart from other Body Snatchers is that half the cast in the show are pod people themselves, and we get to see them coming to terms with the idea that they aren't themselves anymore, coming to grips with what that would mean if they're different, then how.
I half expected to walk into some kind of...
Village of the Damned.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, exactly like Village of the Damned. Yeah, I thought you were all gonna be like pod people.
Like what?
You know, like, zombified. You know, like puppet master, body snatched people.
This is a similar dynamic that we saw in the Battlestar Galactica remake around the same time period. That series also had cast members being replaced with duplicates and questioning their own humanity, and those themes of paranoia were also there. The show takes place in a Florida town after a hurricane blows through, and people who were missing in the storm are found without a scratch on them, and even they have to admit they don't feel quite the same anymore and find themselves looking for answers. William Fichtner plays the town sheriff and is perfect casting for the role. I mean, he's the standout performance, I think, but he usually is. Veronica Cartwright, who starred in the 78 version and then had a small role in the 2007 version, also featured in 5 of these episodes as well. The series runs for 22 episodes and then gets cancelled, so the unresolved cliffhanger ending should be annoying and possibly deter people from seeking it out, but I thought the series was wrapped up alright and the cliffhanger was kind of obvious and so not that tantalizing. I got to the end and I thought, okie dokie. Now, if you go looking for the 2005 TV series on DVD, make sure you don't get this movie, also called Invasion, also from 2005. I don't know what this is, okay? Director Albert Payan was known for his B-movies, and I've mentioned them on this channel before, but this is a new low even for him. It's not really so much a Body Snatchers film either, it's supposed to be a found footage movie. In this case, the footage is dash cam from a sheriff's car that never changes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play a chunk of the movie in super fast forward, okay? So you get an idea of what an endurance test watching this movie must be, and then we can all just move on. Yeah, the whole movie is this, for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there are plenty of alien invasion movies and shows that owe a debt to Body Snatchers, and the 2021 Invasion television series has been credited as one of those. But to be honest, I think the series is more of a nod to War of the Worlds, another famous alien invasion movie. The main reason I dismiss the series on this list again is no pods, not even human duplicates this time. No pods, no pod people. Now we jump to 2019. There's a movie called Assimilate, where there are two friends who find out that their family and everybody that they know are being replaced by duplicates, and we get to see a sort of 2019 version of our classic pod people plot, both through a cinematic lens and a bit of found footage type aesthetics, as the two are also making a video blog about their town. The tension and creepiness that settle in here are just like you'd expect from a doppelganger movie, but it does illustrate just how, like most slashers, there aren't a huge number of special effects or budgetary requirements, large set pieces, costumes, or alien ships, allowing lower budget movies to play in this genre. Assimilate doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it does have a few scenes and ideas that work well to retell the Body Snatcher story again in 2019, and this one actually has pods. In the new wave of teen horror movies in the 90s led by Scream, we got Faculty in 1998, and the best way to describe this movie is The Breakfast Club meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's about a diverse group of teens, a jock, a nerd, a princess,
and an athlete,
and a basket case, a princess,
and a criminal.
Seriously, though, it does have a representation of all these different cliques that you would find in high school. It's star-studded with Salma Hayek, Jon Stewart, Josh Hartnett, Elijah Wood, Clea Duvall, Robert Patrick, Famke Janssen, Piper Laurie, Bebe Neuwirth, Jordana Brewster, Usher, and Chris McDonald. I mean, that's pretty insane cast.
Only through conformity among the masses can the unified state offer the benefits of power, order, and security.
While other movies in the genre of 90s new wave slashers could be taken a little more seriously, being mysterious slasher thrillers, the supernatural or extraterrestrial angle makes this movie a little cheesier than others. But here we are decades later, and this Robert Rodriguez directed movie holds up as a fun teen horror romp, and aside from there being no pods, the rest of the movie holds up pretty well.
They're using us as hosts. They're just turning us into mindless slaves they can control.
And I saved the best one for last. The best modern Body Snatchers movie for my money is Edgar Wright's The World's End in 2013. It's the third of his Cornetto trilogy following Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz is my personal favorite of the three, but I think that World's End is a bit underrated. I didn't even realize until now that all three of the Cornetto movies explore being sort of excommunicated outsider. In Shaun of the Dead, obviously, the zombie horde has represented a reflection of society's mundane and rote behavior since Dawn of the Dead. And in Hot Fuzz, Simon Pegg is in an off-putting village community that he doesn't feel at ease in. And in World's End, Simon Pegg rounds up his old high school buddies for one last tour of their old home for a fabled night of drinking, where they plan to hit up 10 pubs. The alien invasion isn't really pod people, but they've kept it all very fresh feeling and represented all the important thematic elements of a pod people movie, and it's done with great humor and fantastic action scenes.
It's not an invasion, it's a merger. They don't want to get rid of us, not if they can help it. They just want to make us more like them. Change the way we think.
There was one last example that I wanted to give of maybe a reason why pod people have become a quaint idea and not as terrifying as they once were. In the 90s, there was a science fiction alien menace that embodied most of the important elements of the invasion of the Body Snatchers in a way that few have come close to topping. The Borg from Star Trek: The Next Generation. The Borg really are the ultimate statement on Body Snatcher aliens. They share a hive mind, they're relentless, emotionless, they do actually steal our bodies, just not with pods. The H.R. Giger biomechanical, edgy aesthetic kind of makes the pods of the Body Snatchers look like Audrey 2 from The Little Shop of Horrors. Kind of charming, really. So we made it! That was it, that's the whole list. You know, the concept of feeling alienated from our own culture and society, the individual versus the body politic, I think that's normal for everybody, in every generation. Maybe for different reasons, but also largely for the same reasons. Because we're human. Aren't we? Click like to prove that you're a human, still one of us, okay? And if there's any of us left, I'll see you next week.